Hello, everyone. My name is Kyla Hannington, and I'm the Public Outreach and Engagement Division Manager with the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights, the county's civil and human rights education and enforcement agency. Our office investigates complaints of civil rights discrimination, combats human trafficking, ensures equitable language access to county government services, and builds programming to educate on civil rights and social justice, and to build community across diverseness that is our county. With me today as co-hosts are Tiana Davis from the Office of Human Rights and Dr. Audrey Lau from the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. And it is our pleasure to welcome you to another episode of Social Justice and Community, our partnership series with the Prince George's County Memorial Library System and the University of Maryland. This series was brought to us by Dr. Chris Marsh, and it looks at questions like, how does human rights research impact our communities? How does scholarship on human rights violations or issues of social justice have any meaning in our day-to-day lives? And what is being discussed, studied, and thought about in universities today? We bring human rights scholars into conversation about how their work illuminates human rights struggles around us today and what we can do about those struggles. So today we're very excited to be welcoming, welcoming Danielle Koonce, presenting Environmental Justice in the Rural South, Research and Community Organizing. She's a doctoral candidate in the Department of Sociology. She enjoys thinking about the connections and relationships between race and space, particularly rural spaces, and how those relationships contribute foundationally to many broad themes in sociology. As a social movement scholar, she's also interested in understanding contemporary Black resistance movements, such as the environmental justice movement and Black Lives Matter, specifically as the latter experiences organizational shifts in societal reach. Her dissertation examines the dynamics of power and how these dynamics play out through activists and activism in urban and rural settings. Danielle, we are so happy to have you with us today. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to Prince George's County Library System, as well as the Office of Human. Yes, want to make sure I said it correctly.
Human rights, you got us.
Human rights, yes. So thank you guys for having me. Thank you to Dr. Marsh, who is also my dissertation chair and an advisor and mentor. And I'm just really thankful for this opportunity. So I'm not going to delay. Let me just say again, I want to say hello to my fellow Prince George's County residents. I actually lived in College Park until moving back to Eastern North Carolina to conduct my dissertation research. So I feel like that is a second home for me. And so just want to wave at everyone from Prince George's County. But if you could, Kyla, if you could start my slides, thank you. And so thank you. This is just a really kind of choppy title, but I think is very actually relevant for just talking about human rights and social justice, the battle for clean water in rural Black communities, a preview of what's to come in the era of massive environmental change. And I think we're all aware that our environment is changing very drastically, very quickly in terms of our geographical environment, but we can also think about the fact that we're doing this presentation virtually. So our environment, just in a technological aspect, is changing. And so with change comes a lot of opportunities, but there are also a lot of challenges. And so this is a picture of me. This is what I've been doing. This is how I split my time. So let me just warn you, if there's any interruption during my presentation, it's going to be on my end because I have 3 little ones and we're starting our spring break. And so they're going to come in with a lot of energy. So I'm hoping that I can wrap up before they get home. My 4-year-old is already downstairs binging on Netflix. So hopefully that keeps her occupied. But I'm just going to say up front that I am a PhD candidate, but I'm also a full-time mom. And so the picture is really intriguing to me because when we left Prince George's County, we came back to rural Eastern North Carolina. So I'm a country girl through and through. I was raised beside cornfields, tobacco fields, cucumber fields, and a sky full of stars. So I really love the open country space. And so when the kids came back, they were enamored with mud puddles. And so what you see is they are having a field day, just in a mud puddle, just running, jumping, just having a ball. And so this is one of the fun things that I enjoyed as a kid as well, is just getting out there and playing in the yard after a heavy rain. But my research, which I'm doing back home in Sampson County, really has led me to understand how water has become highly contaminated in my county. And so, what you see in front of you, first, I'm going to talk about the picture. So, this is actually an old slave plantation that is still erect in our county. Um, the reason that I'm putting this picture up is because this region where this slave plantation is, this region of our county has been highly contaminated through hog farms, industrial poultry farms. We also have the state's largest and most toxic landfill in our county. We have a biogas facility that is just really getting active. And we also are home to a wood pellet facility. So we have a triangular combination of agricultural pollution, we have a landfill, and then we have some renewable gas facilities. And so between these industries and operations, we have really had our environment impacted, our air and as well as our water quality. So my focus has been on the water quality, and I'm coming from that from a sociological perspective because I'm really wanting to understand how residents are advocating for themselves. Okay, so obviously being in the rural South or being in Prince George's County, one thing that I was intrigued by is just all the local supports. Like there's multiple libraries, and each community has like its community center. So there's many ways to disseminate information, to gather, to learn. The transit system, that was a blessing. The bus system, that was a blessing to help me get connected, to get the kids connected. We love going to the parks. There were so many ways to traverse in Prince George's County. But when you're in a rural space, and some of you may be from rural areas, so you understand this, that traveling can be very different. The communities are very close knit, but they're also very closed off, even from other communities within the county. And so one thing about Sampson County is it's 84 miles long, from the northern part to the southern part. So it's the second largest county in the state of North Carolina. And we have lots of rural areas that are pretty much little small islands within themselves. So I was really interested in how folks are advocating for themselves regarding the issues they're dealing with in terms of air quality and water quality, and most specifically water quality. So this is actually my father's church. I'm also a PK, which is short for preacher kids, and I'm sure we may have some of those in the audience. But so as a preacher's kid, I grew up, in the country, but also in the church. And so this is a picture of my father's church. And so what you see here are individuals from a nonprofit organization that I previously volunteered with. We're collecting water samples because my father's church was notified that they were not able to drink their water. So if you look at the front door of the church, there was a posting on the front door, and it said, "Do not drink, high nitrate levels. Do not drink this water. Do not use this water to make infant formula. Do not use this water. Do not give this water to people who are immune compromised." And so for almost a year, the church was unable to even wash their hands. They could only wash their hands with the water. They could not drink it. And so there were huge, just big old like piles and piles of bottled water. They also purchased one of those gallon water tanks to put in the church. And so the reason for this high nitrate level was because behind those trees is an industrial hog farm. And the industrial hog farm waste has seeped into the groundwater. For most folks in rural places, they rely on ground water wells for their water sources. So we are not connected to city water, which I have to admit, I had to adjust to the taste of city water when I moved to Prince George's County. But and there's a distinct difference between the two. So our water comes from the ground, and usually very shallow wells. The wells could be as shallow as 40 feet. And so what happens if there's any kind of contaminations through the rivers or through the streams or spillage, it will impact the groundwater. And so this is another example of what you can see in our county. So you see this house, and then right beside the house is a hog industrial farm. So this can show you the proximity sometimes of people's homes and their proximity to some of these industrial pollutants. And so this is a group of individuals that I have been volunteering with as a dissertation student. And so it is a group of researchers and organizers throughout the state. We represent 3 universities. So I represent the University of Maryland, but also UNC Chapel Hill, as well as Appalachian State. And what we do, we're essentially basically trying to help represent community residents from various counties as they fight for clean water and for clean air. So this is a picture of what I do. So I'm not necessarily the environmental scientist. I'm not testing water. You see me with my paper because I actually interview and talk to the residents. So the scientists collect the water samples, and then I come in as a sociologist and I talk and ask questions to the resident. And some of the questions could be, like, how do you like your well water? And I will say that, and forgive me, Prince George's County, but the rural residents, they believe that there is nothing better than country water. If you have never had water straight from the well, then you need to come on down to North Carolina. And so they are very, very proud of the fact that they drink their well water and they drink it from the ground. But they're also very concerned because their water color, for some of them, their water is brown, yellow. It stains their clothes. Many of them do not drink their water anymore for fear of the toxins that they cannot taste, but that they assume to be in their water. And so we have been a volunteer team. We don't charge residents anything. We come, we take water samples. And again, I don't do the testing of the water. I focus really on talking to residents. And it's been amazing to be in my own county, talking to folks that know me or knew my grandmother or knew my grandfather or know of my people, and just learning about the ways in which that they've had to fight to try to get a healthy water drinking system. Some of these residents, and again, just to kind of help you to understand the economic situation, I say the average median income is roughly about $45,000. So if you compare that to Prince George's County, you can understand that, we are a little bit more tight in terms of the money that we have flowing through our county. And so we've had some residents that I've spoken to who have opted to, like I spoke to a sister, and she and 3 other of her sisters came together and paid about $25,000 to try to get their water clean and purified, to dig a deeper well, because again, so many people's wells are shallow. And unfortunately, this did not solve their pollutant problems, because one thing that I wasn't able to show you is that with the hog farm, let me slow down because some of you may not even understand hog farm. So some of you may envision Charlotte's Web and you're thinking that there's a couple of pigs, on a farm, but those are the days of yesterday. And I grew up like that. I grew up where a hog farm was 1 or 2 hogs, and almost every other neighbor had a hog, and, you would have hog killing time, and it was a fun time. I can remember my grandmother. She was one of the best in terms of cleaning the hog, and I can name some things that we ate from the hog, but I'll leave that for another presentation. But that, again, is a rarity now. So if you're coming to Eastern North Carolina to see that, there are a few places who still do that. But the hog farm model is now, it's an industrialized operation. So essentially a farm could have between 4, 5, 10,000 hogs. Some of the operations are that big. And so they house these pigs within these kind of like mobile buildings. And so you'll have 4,000 or 5,000 hogs. And the major challenge is, how do we get rid of the waste, right? Because we know pork is big globally. Lots of people love pork. And so we have these pigs. We're going to, eventually they're going to go, they're going to be butchered, and we're going to, cut the meat, slice the meat, and it's going to sell all over the world. But what do we do with the waste? And so one way that the waste is eliminated is that the poop, they take these water hoses, these big water hoses, and they spray inside the hog houses. And all of that feces goes into a holding pond. It looks like a pond, but it's not water. It's actually a pond full of hog feces. And so what they do with that hog feces, one of the options is that they spray it on nearby neighboring fields. And so I had a video embedded, but it's not going to play. But so if you can just imagine how you would take a water hose and spray your plants, essentially that is the same concept. They're taking thousands and thousands of pounds of feces, and they're spraying it on fields as a potential fertilizer. Unfortunately, that amount of waste is high in nitrates, high in methane gas. And so when that gets into the waterways, it can contaminate people's water. Another issue that we're facing, my family is directly impacted by this, is PFAS. And I know that you may have heard, some of you may have heard about PFAS. I encourage you to, take some time to Google PFAS, because a vast majority of Americans have some type of PFAS contamination. And PFAS is found in drinking water, wastewater treatment plants. Firefighting suits are made from PFAS. PFAS is used for pans and in chemical toxins to create durability. And so what we've been experiencing also in our county is, so recently, and this is personal, my parents had their water tested, and their levels for PFAS contamination were some of the highest in our county. And so we found that other homes in my parents' community have also had high levels of PFAS. And so I'm not the technical expert on PFAS or the types of toxins. Again, I talk to people. And so what I found is there's a lot of hurt and also shock, because people in the rural South, we really pride ourselves in being independent. We are very independent. And so this has been a repetitive statement from individuals that I've spoken to. If I did this to my water, I would fix it. The issue is, I didn't do this to my water, and I need help fixing it. So for my parents, they're going to need a whole house filtration system, which is roughly $20,000 to $25,000. So right now they're on bottled water. They've been told not to use the water to drink. They're not even cooking with the water. So we've installed the gallon water tank. They get their water from there for the most part. So really, they're only showering with the water. And so I wish I could say that this was just a small incident, a small isolated group of people. But the vast majority of people in our county do not trust their water source. They're living off of bottled water. They're living off of filtered water. And so you guys do the math. Like, if you solely only drink bottled water, those bills start to add up. And I've already explained that this is not a high economic region. Okay, so I'm talking to a lot of people who are on fixed income or who are retired, who've had homes and their land passed down generationally. This is another issue that I connect back to that slave home, because we see a generational example of what I call environmental oppression. Okay, so I definitely think it's an offshoot of slavery. So you have these, massive slave plantations that were under extreme oppression, right? Like, we know that this was extreme economic violent oppression. And then you fast forward 150 years later, 200 years later, and you still have individuals now experience economic, environmental oppression. Things are happening to their water and to their air that they're not in control of now due to industrialized pollutants. And so again, this is a picture of the landfill in Sampson County. The Sampson County landfill is one of the most toxic landfills in the nation. And one thing that I have not brought up is the fact that the largest majority of people experiencing these environmental impacts are Black and brown people. And this is not, again, this is not just a coincidence. If you know anything about environmental justice or environmentalism, environmental racism, most of our wastewater treatment plants, if you ask yourself, where's the wastewater treatment plant in Prince George's County? Where's the wastewater treatment plants in Washington, D.C.? Where are the landfills located? Where are the nuclear waste sites located? You will find that 9 times out of 10, these sites, these treatment centers, these landfills, these waste treatment centers, the nuclear sites, they're located near Black and brown communities. If you ask yourself, where are these major chemical industries like DuPont, where are they located? Where do they put their main manufacturing spaces? You will also find that they are normally built near impoverished Black and brown communities. And so what happens is you have these huge these huge industries that are profiting economically. And then you have these, largely minority, lower income communities who are receiving all of the environmental burdens, okay? And so that's what's happening in Sampson County, but Sampson County is not unique. That's happening actually all over the nation. And so my dissertation is looking at how individuals in these communities are organizing. And so this is a picture of the ways in which folks in one community have organized themselves. They're using the churches. And so one thing that's really interesting to me is that we really are seeing a page out of the modern civil rights movement from the 1940s until the late 1970s. And so you saw the church being pivotal and central to the civil rights movement, where you had the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, the Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, the Reverend, everyone who was really a leader. Even if you think about Malcolm X, he was the honorable, right? He was a minister in the Muslim faith. And so we still see the impacts of religious leaders being able to open up their churches, which is really one of the few places in rural spaces where communities can come together to organize. And so that's one thing that I've noted in my dissertation is still the power and the prominence of the church to be an organizing site for people to come to learn. So many people have had what they call a hunch about their water. Like they was like, I just knew I didn't need to drink it, but they really have not been educated as to why, or things that they can do to mitigate contaminations in their water. And what is it that they smell in the air? If you live near the landfill, the smell is noxious. It goes through the homes. People say they can smell it when they lay down, but they may not understand what they're smelling. So we're doing a lot of education to just help people to understand what they could be taking in through the air and what they could be drinking if they have ground well water. And so thank you for allowing me to share portions of my research, and I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Wow, that was great. Thank you so much. I have many questions. I'm really interested in, I would love to talk about rural spaces and the injustice. But I'm going to actually start us off with a question that we have from one of our viewers, Ms. Vivian, who I'm going to put it up on screen. Ms. Vivian is wondering, what led you to do this kind of work?
Good question, Ms. Vivian. Honestly, it became very personal for me because I actually came home to do my dissertation work on Black land loss. And so if any of you know about air property is a big issue in Black America. And so I came home to really start researching land loss. And my mother was on a Zoom call, and she was like, honey, you need to come in here because I don't really know what they're talking about, but I think it's interesting. And so I just jumped on the Zoom call with her, and they were talking about water contamination and air pollution, and they were talking about our county. Our county is second in the world. Like, we have more hogs in our county than people. And I became so intrigued by that here is my home county, right? I'm supposed to be this highly educated woman. I'm at the University of Maryland working on my PhD, and I was ignorant to the issues that were actually my home people in my native county were facing. So I immediately pivoted and said, if I'm going to be home, if I'm going to bring my family home, I want to do work that I know that I can actually touch the community and serve the community.
Wow. Thank you. I did want to say, actually, the first comment I meant to say was that we love kid interruptions. And so if they come in, I just want you to know they're welcome. We love that. That brings joy to everyone's heart. So let me go there. And I'm sorry. So Audrey or Tiana, please.
Yes. So I have like a multi-part question, and it's more so to understand the process. So when you go to test water, do you already know how many people are affected by that particular source of water?
No, we don't. Like, we knew we had to gain some evidence, right? Like, if you're gonna have any sway in policy or with even your local representatives, definitely on the state and federal level, you need numbers, right? And so this is where it becomes very important. We can't just say there are some folks complaining about their water, that they can't use their water. They want numbers. And so we essentially basically just, I helped create a survey, a questionnaire, and we asked people to sign up and tell us a little bit about some of the issues they were having with their water. And so to date, we've probably tested roughly 250 homes we've visited, talking to folks. And I can almost, like, now I know exactly what people are going to say. Like, they show us their water, they show us their white clothes. If they put white clothes, some of the individuals, if they put their white clothes in the washer, their clothes come out yellow and stained. We had a lady who wears dentures, and her doctor kept saying, you're going to have to slow down on your coffee. And she was like, I don't drink coffee. And he was like, well, what are you doing? And she was like, I put my dentures in a glass of water by my bed every night. And he asked her, he said, where do you live? And when she told him, he said, oh, yeah, you don't need to use that water. The water was literally staining her dentures. That's how contaminated it was with certain chemicals. So the stories have just been incredible, but we really didn't know what we were going to find until we just started doing the work.
Okay. How long does it take to get the results from like the tests?
Now, that's something that we've gotten better at because, again, this is all volunteer. So, you can go to your public health department, right? And at least we go to the public health department here. I'm not sure for Prince George's County, but they have a water division. The thing is, it's very underfunded and it's understaffed. So particularly during COVID 2020 and 2021, some people had a 6-month wait just to get someone to come test their water. So what we do, we collect the water, and then the water is taken back to 2 labs. One of the labs is at Appalachian State, and the other lab is at UNC Chapel Hill. And so the process, and this is all volunteer, so it could take, at first it was taking about 3 to 4 months for us to get results back. We've learned to speed up the process so we can get them back to them in less than 2 months. But these are not what I would call state standard water. Like, the state has places that they will only accept water tests from, right? So this is a beginning source because in Sampson County, if I wanted to get my water tested, it's going to cost me $65 to $75 to do it. So it can be, it's an expensive endeavor.
Well, I guess I'll go next. Well, I guess my question, I come from a town that had so much industrial waste because of steel, the steel foundries. And I just really appreciated your comment about clothing, because my grandmother would tell me about how they would stop work at some of the factories on certain days so that people could do their laundry so their laundry wouldn't turn black. So I guess the one thing I'm wondering is the kind of health issues that you're seeing in these communities as a result of these toxins.
Yeah. Thank you. And we're still doing a lot of, we're trying to get funding and get more, like we're undergoing some health assessments now. So when it comes to the air, like the landfill with the air toxins, we believe that there are some cancer clusters, right? Like we've had residents who have come outside and they've pointed to every house on their row and said, that person had this cancer, that person had this cancer, that person died of cancer. Now, we don't have the evidence. If you guys know anything about laws, it is really hard to prove that someone's cancer came from this, right? Because there's so many different cancer-causing agents. Also, high levels of asthma because of the air challenges in terms of water quality. High nitrates are really bad for babies. They are for pregnant women. They could lead to early births. And so those are some of the things that we have noticed. And I was really, really struck by the church because I actually had my son dedicated. One of my sons dedicated at my father's church, and just had no idea that the water was so contaminated. And I think that's the challenge is most people have no idea what's happening with their water and with their air because it's become a part of the landscape, similar to the steel mills. And you take pride in the rural, rustic landscape of where you're from. And so, people have talked to me like, how can you be against hog farmers? Like, it's laughable. It's hard to be from the country and say you're against any kind of farming because I grew up, my grandfather was a farmer. My grandmother was a farmer. If you push me, I will get out there and farm. I know how to farm. I was raised that way. So no one is against farming. What we are against is the fact that the farming industry has been able to rake in billions and billions and $billion worth of profits, and they've left all the environmental degradation. They put that burden on the residents and basically said, hey, do what you can, figure it out, right? And so to me, that is inhumane. Like that is injustice at its best, that that you're doing, like you're dumping toxins in the water, right? You're dumping toxins in the air, and then you're asking individuals to take care of it. Individuals who are already limited economically.
That kind of leads into a question that I had, which was, if we're looking at, so these industrial farms, which is different, and I think you did a really nice job of showing, like, we're not talking about your grandparents' farm or your parents' farm or the farm that you have in your backyard that maybe some people have raising some animals, that this is this like industrial level farming. And so one of the questions I had, and I feel like I already know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I'm just waiting for everyone to groan when they hear me ask it. Is there any responsibility for the farmer, the industrial, the company, the entity that has these, industrial farms for the harm to the water? Like when you were talking about, people and the buying the water and this, the cost, the sheer cost, or your family needing the filtration system, is there any, I don't mean moral responsibility because I feel like we also know the answers to that. Is there a legal responsibility so that there is some relief for the people who are really victimized by this?
I can only speak for North Carolina. So North Carolina, just a couple of years ago, they had some major lawsuits against the hog industry, against Smithfield Farms, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Most of you probably eat some of their pork. Now, this is a Chinese-owned company that is operating under the name Smithfield. So Smithfield was sold to a Chinese company. And so the lawsuit was successful for the plaintiffs, right? Like it was egregious what the hog farms were doing. They were literally spraying hog, some of the time they were spraying hog waste on people's homes, on the kids in the backyard playing on the swing sets. They were spraying the swing sets, spraying it on people's cars. They started testing the inside. I don't know if you guys are familiar with modular homes. The modular homes are very popular. And so they were testing the inside of people's modular homes, and they were seeing hog excrement on the walls. Like, this is how pervasive this stuff was. And so the courts, it was one of the highest settlements, in at least in our state. The next year, our North Carolina legislators passed a law called the hog nuisance laws, which makes it almost impossible and illegal to sue a hog farm. Right. So this is textbook. But I realize, like, this is happening not just in North Carolina. I love my state. This is happening all over. Like, the industry is very well connected to the state, the local, and the federal government through lobbying, through policies. And so they maneuver very fast. So let me give you an example. I showed you guys my father's church in the picture. My parents went to the North Carolina General Assembly and spoke and gave comments about the water and the fact that my father pastors a very elderly church. So the average age is roughly mid-50s. And so basically they asked this church to turn off your water supply. And so the next day, my father received a letter from Smithfield Farms. The Smithfield industry, I'm sorry. And they basically said, hey, we heard your, like, how do they know? Like, that quickly. There was a letter in the mail saying, we want to be a good neighbor. We don't think it was our farm that caused the water contamination due to, they talked about the elevated ground. You guys saw the picture. Did you guys see any elevation on the ground? Like, it was laughable, but that just shows you the power of the industry. Like, when you have billions worth of dollars and you have a troop of lawyers, you have a troop of policy people, and they're ready to put out any kind of negativity. And so those are some of the challenges that we're up against. But what I found just through talking with people, like, people are still very powerful, right? Like, if you really think about the civil rights movement, the 1950s, 80% of African Americans were living under poverty. Like, they were living day to day, dollar to dollar. Yet these individuals were able to organize and rally and essentially get, like, the most equal rights, like the most civil rights legislation passed in the history of our nation. And so, I mean, we look back on that and think, like, well, it was incredible, but it's still incredible because the odds were stacked against them. I still believe in the power of the people. What I'm seeing now, like, we've had people who have decided to run for local office. We have people organizing in their communities. The people within the rural spaces are so intelligent. They're so sharp. I really came in as a researcher thinking I was going to teach them and help them, but it's been the opposite. They understand the industry. They understand the dynamics. They understand everything that's happening within their communities. The challenge is, how do they advocate? Who do they go to? If you're from the South, right, we're very distrustful of anything outside of our own communities. And so even myself, I'm a native, but I've been gone a long time. So they see me as, they already think I'm a doctor, right? Oh, this is a doctor. She's a doctoral student. They don't necessarily, so I'm part of them, but I'm also separate. But there's a lot of power within these rural spaces. And I'm really excited about the development that I've seen in just the last 3 years that I've been doing this research.
I can Audrey or Tiana, because I have, like,
I'm just kind of curious about the like, when you talk about these churches and things, what kind of how do you I mean, this is you're talking about a state with a right to work, so advocacy is frowned upon for, labor issues and things like that. So talk to us a little bit about, like, what those, like, get-togethers look like.
I think they're beautiful. It's very personal. There's a spiritual component to it. I think one thing that we take for granted, and I know I have taken for granted, is the connection between Black America and the land and the ground, right? Like we were essentially enslaved Africans were brought to this country to really do one thing, and that's work the land. And so even though we are not necessarily the poster child when it comes to environmentalism, or you think about nature, you normally don't see pictures of us, right? But if you really think about it historically, there is this very deep spiritual connection to Blacks and the ground, because we literally come from that. Like we really got it out of the mud, all right, historically. And so what I'm seeing are people who have a spiritual connection to their home place, a spiritual connection to the land. They fish here, they plant gardens here, they plant grapes here, they plant beautiful flower beds here. Like they are highly, highly connected to the land. They're very, very proud of that. And then so to see them organizing, not necessarily because they want to take down an industry. Do you know how many people say, oh, they call me Sister Danielle. Sister Danielle, my husband works for the hog farm industry, or my cousin. No one is trying, like we're not trying to take down the industries. We just want to protect what's ours, right? And so that's been a really beautiful process to see that. And I feel a lot of pride in being able to be a part of that. But it is, I've gotten some ugly looks. I've been at some public meetings. I've had people take pictures of me. So I do think that I've been surveilled a little bit. I don't mind it. And obviously now that I have children, I think a little bit differently, because, there are some crazy people out here. But for the most part, I've made the decision, like, a PhD is a very tortuous process. So I really feel very vindicated in just being able to do work that's meaningful, that I know is helping my community.
Well, that it is incredible work. And I mean, there's a couple things that you touched on that I wanted to sort of maybe just let you know about, and also people watching. Like you mentioned that you had started doing your PhD because you were, as I understand it, and relocated, back to Eastern North Carolina because you had an interest in heirs property. And so that's something that we at the Office of Human Rights have been very interested in. We did an event that I put in the chat for people watching. A few minutes ago, I put a link in there. We did an event not too long ago with Dr. Carlton Waterhouse about redlining environmental justice, that also talked a bit about heirs property. And it's something that, we are continuing to work on here. And I was wondering if you, even though I know it's that you've moved, you stepped aside or you stepped differently for your PhD, could you just take a minute and let our audience know like what that means for maybe people who aren't familiar with that term?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And one of the reasons it's so important to me is because I'm experiencing it right in real time. So one of my great grandfathers left roughly 25 acres. And at the time, now he was born, I want to say 1898, late 1800s, early 1900s. So by the time that he acquired the property, his mindset, again, this is not to fault. Like, I don't want to ever suggest that this is the fault of Black Americans. His mindset, as well as everybody, let me leave this to all my heirs. They can never take it away. And so he had 10 children. And so all of their names were put on the original deed. Now, once we speed up to 2024, this becomes a nightmare, because now, my grandmother was one of his children. My grandmother also had 10 kids. My mother is the baby. So now all of her children are an heir to the property. Now me and my 5 siblings are an heir to the property. Now I have my 3 kids. They also are an heir to the property. And so what happens is you have all of these, generational lineages who are connected to those 25 acres. Now what happens is, or what has happened throughout the South, is that you have people who just watch. So the last heir just passed away. Like we literally had her funeral. My grandmother was the oldest, and her baby sister is the youngest. She just passed away maybe 2 months ago. So she was the last living heir. But again, all of us now are part owners, but we live all over the nation. And so a developer can come in and say, oh, I really see a vision for this 25 acres. And so I have relatives in Springfield, Massachusetts. They may not ever come back here. I have some in Orlando, Florida. Well, they'll find addresses. They'll send a letter and say, hey, we'll pay you this much for your portion of the land. And what happens, $10,000 seems like a good amount of money, right? For land that you're not connected to, that you haven't visited since you were a child, that was maybe 30 or 40 years ago. And so what happens, the developer can purchase enough of the property and then take it to court to get the rest of the land. And so what my great grandfather left as part of his legacy now can easily be pursued by developers or other individuals who have purchased heirs' property rights. And you just have to purchase a certain percentage before you become the full owner of the land. And so lots of Black land has been lost this way. Some of the most popular or well-known, if you think about the Gullah people living in Savannah, parts of South Carolina, there's lots of developers who, that's beach property is beautiful land. But it's happening. I'm going to be attending some workshops. So North Carolina is a little bit slower in terms of legislation to help with land loss, Black heirs property. South Carolina is actually doing a better job. And so I've been contacting folks in South Carolina, but there is a partnership between A&T University and NC State, and they're starting to do some workshops to just help educate people, because again, you get overwhelmed when you think about how many people's names are attached to that land. And I don't know about you, but I know my first cousins, but if you got to push me, then I have to contact my second and third cousins and people who have left for years and have never come back, right? Because that's what happens a lot in the South. You have people who have moved to Chicago, have no plans of coming back, and they don't care what happens to the land. And that's when it can become very problematic.
Well, thank you so much for that explanation and introduction. I will let you know that our friends at Howard University have an heirs property clinic as well. We're working with them, and actually one of their students will be on this program next year, actually, to talk about that. But I'm just also letting you know, and for people watching, like if this is something that is touching you or your family, and just know that Howard University, law school has a heirs property clinic, and I'm going to encourage viewers to reach out to them for information. My next question, so Audrey and Tiana, one more question, then I'm going to give it back, I promise. As you were talking, before you shared that you had an initial plan for your dissertation, I was thinking, okay, you've gone home and you have this idea for your thesis, which is, I don't think this is your thesis, I'm going to paraphrase, but that really looking at activism, right? Am I right? You're looking at activism in these rural communities. And so what I was wondering is when you went in, what did you think you were going to find? And so far, what have you actually found?
That's a good question. So when I went in, I thought I was going to find a lot of people who were largely uneducated about the environmental impacts in their communities. Like I really thought I was going to come in and do them a service, right? And I was going to have some pamphlets and I was going to share information and I was going to help them organize. But when I really came in, I found people who were, again, very well aware of the environmental impacts and degradation that they're experiencing, very well aware of the local government and how local politics worked, and just very well aware of their space and their place, And so that's really just been very humbling, but also very exciting for me. And so it's helped me to know what gaps to fill in. So now I find myself, I consider myself more just as a bridge, connecting folks, connecting people to nonprofit environmental organizations, connecting people to lawyers if they need that, connecting people to resources, helping people figure out what the best filters are, and so essentially just listening and whatever they're asking me to do. So it's been a very good experience, and again, one that I stumbled upon, but I'm so thankful that I did. And let me just say, Kylie, just to go back to heirs property really quickly, because if someone is listening and they're trying to figure out what to do, one of the main things that I found, that was one great grandfather, but one thing that one of my grandmothers did, I mean, she's just a wise woman. She, at the last minute, just said, I'm going to put this property in one person's name. Right. And I think sometimes she did that before she passed, but it's made a very big difference. And I think we get so connected with family and who you're going to leave it to. But I would really encourage folks to really decide on one person to leave that legacy with. Like, who is the most trustworthy person? Like, the person in your family who does what they say they're going to do, who's honest, who's balanced, who has integrity. Find that person and leave it to them rather than continuing to leave it to multiple heirs. So just wanted to say that.
Thank you for that. And also for people watching, we did put a link in the chat to the Howard University estate planning and heirs property clinic. So if that's something that's resonating for you, check out the chat where you're watching. Thank you. Adriana, do you have a question for Danielle?
Yes. So you mentioned just a couple of minutes ago that you give people, nonprofits that they can contact or like the best filters. Can you give us here some of the best water filters to use? Like, I know of Berkey water filter, but that one's a little expensive. So
no, the zero water filter is the best. And I think it's very affordable. I want to make sure I say it correctly. So it's the zero filter pitcher. I mean, that thing works. And you can get, I think roughly $34. Like, they work really well. So I would certainly invest in one of those. Mm-hmm.
Nice.
I'm going to ask the history question. So I'd like to know the civil rights people that you really admire, because you strike me as someone who may not understand that you're one of those people, in this day and age, and you're advocating for a human right, which is water, clean water, and the right to have it, and the right to be worthy of having it. So you mentioned a lot of people, but I was just curious if you had a personal civil rights person that you really look up to, or someone who's inspired your work, someone you keep on your desk, some quotes.
No, that's a good question. I keep my grandmothers on my desk. So those are my two, Geneva Lamb Ellis, Dixie D. Williams Melvin. So I feel like that I'm living the life that they wanted to live, and they made sacrifices so I could live it. So those are my two inspirations. I find a lot of inspiration in Dr. Martin Luther King, Angela Davis, and Zora Neale Hurston. I really love Zora Neale Hurston and the fact that she, at a time when no one was thinking about it in those terms, she really saw the rural space in those communities. She saw those as vibrant places of research. She saw the wealth and the riches within those Black dialects, within those Black towns, within those Black communities. And so, a little bit of me, I'm really trying to be an extension of her work by focusing on the rural South, because it's not necessarily popular, and it's difficult work to do. When I got to Maryland, urban sociology is very popular. And if you ever come through any sociological writing, you're going to read about Blacks in Chicago. You're going to read about Black people in Baltimore. You're going to read about the inner city Blacks in Detroit, any urban area. But very rarely will you read about the Black people living in the rural South. And that's where I come from. I'm an extension of that. And so she is someone that I really, really admire in terms of just what the trail that she was blazing so early. And of course, I am a PK, so Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, I mean, to me, that just makes sense. I'm a big fan of his wife, Coretta. I don't think she gets the attention that she deserves, as many of the women during the civil rights movement, like they made a conscious decision, like, we're not going to put gender above the movement. But in making that decision, we don't know their stories. So I'm very motivated by them.
I don't really have, I mean, you mentioned Frederick Shuttlesworth, and he's one of my favorites. So I had to,
yeah.
ask.
He is such a fireball.
He was.
Yes.
He put his own kids on the line. And I just, I really think it's amazing that you've moved your little people and yourself down there. And I spent some time in Mississippi, 10 years, and I have a lot of respect for people who live in those rural areas. Some of my favorite people are from the Delta, and it's a different world, and it's a really great world, and they're great people. So I think it's really great what you're doing, and I just I hope that you are getting a lot out of this, not just, and you sound like you are, not just your own work, but personally as well. So
yeah, Mississippi, some of my favorite people live in Mississippi. So yeah, like I said, it's difficult work to do because, like, it takes a while to become an insider. Like, if I wanted to do research in Philadelphia, I can get on the train or the bus, I can go, and then I can leave. But in a rural setting, you could take a year to get to know folks before they will receive you. And so that's a big difference. It makes the work a little bit more challenging, but it is so rewarding when you think about historically, the origin of Black America is the South, just point blank, period. So when you're studying the urban pockets, I always envision that as you're looking at the blossoms, but the root is going to be in the South, right? Like, it doesn't matter what you find. So whatever you want to say about Chicago, you're only looking at the petals. But if we're going to get to the root, well, then we need to go back to reverse migration and go back to Mississippi, where so many Chicagoans came from. And let's figure out why and what's happening and what's still happening in Mississippi and Chicago, right? So, but thank you for that. Thank you for the questions. You guys have asked me some really good questions. Thank you.
It has been an honor to have you. And I can tell you already that you'll be hearing from us again, because a lot of what you're doing lines up with some of our other programming that we do. And it's really speaking to, I think, all of us personally, but also like to the heart of the work that we're doing here. So it's been an honor to have you. I am going to take just a quick minute for everybody who's watching at home and thank all of you for tuning in. We do this for you. So thank you for joining us, spending a little bit of time in your afternoon to tune into social justice and community. We will be doing this every single week, every Thursday from 2 to 3 p.m. Between now and the second week of May. Again, this is in partnership between the University of Maryland, the Prince George's County Memorial Library System, and our office, the Office of Human Rights. Danielle, it has been fantastic getting to know you. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. And please, when you get to the point when you're looking for readers for your dissertation, I know for a fact Audrey and I are volunteering, maybe Tiana too. And but we'd also love to have you back to talk about, when that work is finished, we'd love to sort of hear, where, compared to where we are today, what are your kind of concluding thoughts about that? So we really appreciate everything that you're doing. So thank you, everybody. Thank you to the library. Thank you, University of Maryland. And so everyone, we'll see you next week.